Welcome to Life on the Other Side, stories from prisoners, their families, and those helping them find justice and redemption with Alec Klein. This podcast is sponsored by Republic Book Publishers, which brings you books tackling the important issues of the day and the upcoming book Aftermath, When It Felt Like Life Was Over by Alec Klein. For more information, please check out republicbookpublishers.com. In this episode, we hear from Kate Parker, an Oregon stay-at-home mom who was falsely accused of medical child abuse before she was set free and reunited with her family. Thanks for joining us, Kate.
Hi, thanks for having me, Alec. I appreciate it.
Well, first, Kate, why don't you tell us about your life before all of this happened, before you ran into all of this trouble?
I was a stay-at-home mom and a wife. I homeschooled my kids. 2 of my 8 kids had complex medical needs, so I spent a lot of time taking care of them. I was pretty much like, your normal Joe citizen.
Right. In fact, Kate, I remember this one little fact. Tell me if this is true, that before you ran into the troubles that you ran into, you had never even had a parking ticket in your life. Is that true?
That's true. I've never been stopped by the police for traffic infringement and I've never had any, I had never had any run-in with the law for any reason.
So what was your life like back then before all of this? What was it like?
What was like? Well, it was busy. I have, with a large family, a lot of kids. Life was busy.
You were homeschooling your kids, right?
We have always been a homeschooling family. Jumping ahead, giving a little bit of a spoiler, when the kids were in foster care, they went to public school for that short time. But other than that, we've always homeschooled the kids. And like I said, a couple of the kids had complex medical conditions, and so a lot of time from 2011 specifically to 2013 was very busy with medical interventions and doctor appointments and such.
To what extent was faith a big part of your family life as well?
Faith, I became a Christian. Charlie and I got married in 1991, and he was already a Christian, and I became a Christian. Started walking with Jesus in 1994. So we have always relied on God. I would say faith it's a cornerstone in our family. It always has been. A lot of the decisions that we've made as a family were because of our faith. For example, we chose to adopt internationally 2 children because we believed that was something that we were called to do. And so God has always been paramount in our lives.
That's wonderful. So, Kate, now tell us what happened when you found yourself in trouble with the law.
Okay, well, I'll give you just a quick run up to what happened. So Joshua is my youngest biological child. He was born with multiple medical conditions, and he wasn't predicted to have a long life. Because Joshua had chronic pain, a palliative care doctor on his team started him on opioid medications when he was 5 years old. And specifically, he started on oral oxycodone and fentanyl patches. And then the doctor informed everybody on Joshua's team that it was expected Joshua would need increased dosages of pain meds as time went on, and no one should worry about how high those dosages got because the goal was to keep Joshua pain-free. So over the course of 2 years, the dosages that he was on got extremely high. In August of 2013, when Joshua was not yet 7, Charlie and I were told that Joshua was getting close to death, and the pediatrician and the palliative care doctor wanted him put back on hospice, but hospice wanted a simplified pain medication regimen first. And that is what led to Joshua being admitted to the hospital up in Portland, Oregon, which is 220 miles away from where we live. And he was admitted at the end of August 2013. When we were there was a doctor who was new to the team in the PICU and she was concerned about the medications that Joshua was on, and she didn't understand why Charlie and I were under the impression that he was going to die. And so she reached out to the hospital child abuse pediatrician. And then without meeting or examining Joshua, that child abuse pediatrician diagnosed him as a victim of medical child abuse, contacted DHS, the Child Welfare Division, and law enforcement, and that resulted in Joshua being taken into custody by DHS on September 10th, 2013. And that is what started that's the ball rolling, I guess you'd say.
That must have been a absolutely terrifying moment. Can you bring us back to that day when you were arrested?
Okay, well, I was arrested 7 months later on April 1st, 2014. I had gone and picked up Pizza Hut with my son Isaac, and on the way home we had actually, I'd said, hey, let's take some to Dad. And I think, in hindsight, I think that was a God thing because it's not something I would have normally done. But we stopped by Charlie's work where he was at, and we gave him a few slices, and he gave me a hug and kiss, which also was out of character because normally at work he would not kiss me. So it was very strange, but it was just a quick, love you, see you tonight. And then I left, and I got home and served up the kids, and we were all eating, and there was a knock on the door. And my oldest daughter, Megan, got up and answered the door, and she called out, and it was this very, strangled voice, and she's like, Mom, the police are here. And I cannot tell you what I thought at that exact moment because it was just shock. I remember I walked over to the door, and a female police officer was standing in our foyer, and she asked if I was Catherine Parker, and I said yes. And she told me she had a warrant for my arrest, and would I please turn around? And so I did. I turned around and put my hands behind my back, and it was shocking. It was it's been years, and I was shocked. I was terrified. My kids were shocked. We went outside and we have 2 steps that go down, from our front door. And so we were standing there. A male officer came out from around the house. I guess he had been in the backyard in case, they thought I was going to take off or something, which never occurred to me, of course. And then my boys, David and Isaac, came running around. They had gone out the back door and come around the house, and they ran up to me, and Megan was out on the porch with us and was asking what's going on. I told her to call her dad. She grabbed the phone and called Charlie. She asked where they were taking me. The police, the male cop was telling her things. I don't really remember exactly what he was saying, but I remember Megan asking, will you tell my dad, and handing the phone trying to hand the phone to the police officer, and him being really rough, and saying, no, tell him yourself. And that was shocking. And as I was being led away, before I was led away, Isaac came over and wrapped his arms around me, and I couldn't hug him back, obviously, because I was handcuffed. And I bent my head down, and I kissed the top of his head. And then they led me off, and as I was walking away, Megan said, Mama, and I turned my head to look at her, and she was standing there, and she's like, it's going to be okay. And they led me away. And I had no idea that it was going to be almost 2 years before I came home and saw my kids again.
After that, you spent some time in jail, as I understand. What was that like for you?
Well, yeah, I was lodged at Josephine County Jail, the jail near our home, for a couple of days, and then I was extradited up to Portland, and then I spent 6 months in Portland jails. And you know what? I don't know how to put it in a really succinct way. Jail was very scary at first. It's very cold. The food is awful. Lots of drugs. The profanity was just overwhelming. I was lodged in maximum security or high security. I don't know what the exact characteristic of it is, but I was in solitary confinement 21 hours a day because of my charges. And so jail was sucked, but I was never closer to God than when I was in jail.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, when you've got 21 hours a day to yourself, I had hours and hours and hours every day to read my Bible and to pray and to just be quiet and listen. And God spoke to me. I mean, God, not in an audible, I'm hearing voices way, but he spoke to my spirit and he comforted me. And I knew that even though I was very lonely, I was not alone. And that was, that helped me to have the strength to, get through that period of time.
That's powerful, Kate. And tell us, what were the charges and how many years were you facing potentially in prison if convicted?
I was 42 felony charges and 1 misdemeanor. It usually gets it usually gets written up as 43 felonies. I had 4 assault in the first degrees, like 26 criminal mistreatment first degree. There was computer crime, identity theft, reckless endangerment, and tampering with the witness because I spoke to my children and a person who lives in Chicago, Illinois, but told the police that she overheard me tell my kids to lie to the police.
And how many years were you potentially facing in prison if convicted on the charges?
You know what? I don't actually know. I've heard that it was like 30. My attorneys never told me how long I was facing because when I asked them how long could I possibly go to prison, Lisa Ludwig was my lead attorney, and she said, "You're not going to prison, so it doesn't even matter." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I honestly, the whole time I was up in Portland, I had no idea. It wasn't until I got home and read some articles that said I was facing. Medill Justice Project they investigated my case, and they said that I believe they wrote that I was looking at 30 years.
Right. As you know, that was a case that I oversaw in terms of the investigation and while at the Medill Justice Project. And in fact, our understanding is that you faced so many years in prison. If convicted, it would have essentially been the rest of your life.
Yes.
But Kate, so explain how in the end you were able to go back home and that you were set free. How did that all happen? Especially when you think about this, which is a case where you were accused of administering medical treatment for your children, and yet you weren't actually prescribing the medication. It was being prescribed by doctors, and it was the medical professionals who were dictating the care. So how in the end were you able to resolve all this?
Well, the theory that the state was working under was that I somehow manipulated doctors to perform unnecessary medical treatment for my children. They said I did unnecessary medical treatment for Joshua, but that I was neglecting Bethany's medical needs. And it was a creative theory, according to my attorneys. So when Medill Justice Project investigated the case, they spoke with witnesses. They were able to go through the actual evidence in the case, the police reports, the, medical records, everything. And they published their findings. And within a few weeks after they published their findings that outlined how everything that had been done for Joshua had been medically required, and there was, MRI evidence, because they said the assault charges were based or predicated on the belief that I, convinced a neurosurgeon to do unnecessary brain surgery. And So sorry, it's just that's not how it works. And so they looked, they saw the MRIs. They being the police and the child abuse pediatrician, and they had told the neurosurgeon in her first interview that they weren't worried about the surgery she had performed on Joshua, indicating that they understood that they were medically necessary. But those were the bulk of, that's what the whole case was built on, were the surgeries that were done. So that pretty much blew a hole in their case. And after Medill Justice Project published their findings and shared that with the world, the prosecutor in the case dismissed all of the charges related to the surgeries, and those were all of the assault charges and a big chunk of the criminal mistreatment charges. At that point, there were, over 20 charges, or over 30 charges, I guess. But my trial was supposed to start on the 29th of February, 2016, and in the week before that, there was going to be a bunch of pretrial hearings. One of those hearings was going to be where my attorneys were challenging the jurisdiction of over 20 charges, and it was anticipated and understood by both sides that the state was going to lose all of those charges because they were crime. Okay, when a crime is committed and a prosecutor wants to prosecute for that crime, they have to show that the crime occurred in their jurisdiction, in their county, right? So, and I had been charged with crimes that if they even occurred, which they didn't, but if they had occurred, they occurred like in Josephine County or even in Ukraine. So the prosecutor had exercised extreme overreach in charging, and so he was going to lose all of those charges. So I would have gone to trial with something like 7 charges, and 5 of those charges were for witness tampering, which they were not going to be able to hold those either because they already had my kids' interviews that were conducted when I was in jail, so there was no tampering, and the kids were like, this is ridiculous, that phone call never occurred, and phone records showed that phone call never occurred. So basically, to get back to your question, the state, they didn't have a case. I mean, they didn't. And I believe that, and my attorneys also recognized this, and so we were going to go to trial. But I don't know if you're aware of this. I'm sure you are. Over 95 to 97% of criminal cases in the United States are resolved via a plea deal. And so we were ordered by the judge to participate in a settlement conference. So my attorney said, we have to do this. And so the state at that point, that was in the beginning of February 2016, and the state began bringing offers. And we just kept turning them down because they were ridiculous. And I finally said, if you want me to be a convicted felon, you're going to have to take me to trial and actually convict me because, there was no way I was going to plead to being a felon. And so the state, then my attorney, on the 22nd of February, my attorneys called me and said that there was another offer, and this is one they wanted me to seriously consider, and they wanted me to meet them at the courthouse at 1 o'clock. So this was like at 12. So I, hustled and got down to the courthouse, and the deal that was offered, what it involved was that there was an assurance from DHS that if I would accept the deal, they would not have any reason to get involved with my family and try to take my children when I came home. And that was the most important thing to me because my children had been abused while in foster care. And at that point, I would have done anything to protect them from going back into foster care and being mistreated again. So the deal was that I would plead no contest. The state didn't ask me to say I was guilty because they knew I wouldn't. They said, you plead no contest to these 4 misdemeanors, and you agree to have 5 years probation and don't make medical decisions for your minor age children, and we'll call it a day. And my attorney said, you know what? You should take this because it protects your kids. And I asked if I could talk to Charlie because I wasn't allowed to talk to Charlie except with supervision. And we had one weekly phone call. And I didn't even know the phone number. He had changed our home phone number to satisfy DHS. So they called Charlie. I told him really quickly what the deal was, and he said, take it. And I'm like, but I'll have a criminal record. And I didn't do it. And I didn't want to plead. And I didn't want to have to say I did anything that I know I didn't do. And he said, it doesn't matter. He said, what matters is what God thinks and what the family thinks. And we all know you're innocent. And he goes, God knows you're innocent. We know you're innocent. Your friends know the truth, and nobody else matters. Come home. So I took the deal. And I came home.
Well, so Kate, in the end, you avoided prison time, which is significant. You were reunited with your family. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your life since then. It's been how many years now since this all happened?
Well, since I came home, it's been almost 4.5 years since I came home.
What's it been like since you've been back home, reunited with your family?
Well, being reunited with my family, of course, is wonderful. But it's been hard. A person doesn't go through what I went through and what my family went through and just forget it. Just because we were together again, it didn't make us forget it. But they destroyed the life we had, and their lives led to circumstances which profoundly affected us and changed us, but they didn't destroy us.
What do you mean by that? How it affected you? And
I'm saying we're still standing. We're still a family. We're still strong. And we all know and believe and trust that the day will come when every single person who participated in, the destruction that they did, they're going to have to answer for what for their choices and for their actions. And in the meantime, my family and I are each focusing on the path that God has us on, and we're moving ahead.
Well, tell us about your path, the path that you're on.
Okay. Well, I came home. When I came home, I was on probation, and part of probation in Oregon requires that either you are working or at a job, or you have to be enrolled in school. And I couldn't get hired by anybody in town, so I enrolled part-time in college. And I took some general classes for the first 2 terms. And then on December 18th, 2016, I had a cardiac arrest when the electrical system of my heart went haywire, and I actually collapsed directly onto Emily in our family room. David,
your daughter Emily.
Yeah, my daughter Emily. David performed CPR until paramedics arrived. They shocked me 3 times to get my heart back into normal rhythm. And at the hospital, I was placed in a hypothermic coma. I had had my teeth shoved through my bottom lip when I was intubated, and then I inhaled blood into my lungs, so I developed pneumonia from that. So that kind of complicated my recovery a bit, but I got through that. And
How close were you to death?
Oh, I technically died, and I was resuscitated. My medical records say I'm a survivor of sudden death. So, yeah, I technically died, and then I was resuscitated. So
resurrected.
Yeah, I guess as close to death as you can get. And I had a defibrillator implanted in my chest, and there's a lead that's threaded through my heart and embedded in one of the ventricles, so that if the electrical system goes nuts again, I can get internally shocked. But I haven't had any issues since my original cardiac arrest, and my cardiologist suspects the reason for that is because he thinks that the reason I had the cardiac arrest in the first place was a culmination of the years of unrelenting stress.
Mm. And what about your children? How are they doing?
My children are great. They're all doing as well as they can be expected to be doing given the circumstances they lived through. But
yes, you mentioned, for instance, you mentioned that your kids were in foster care. You're talking about the time when you were under court supervision. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was the day after, okay, September 10th, 2013 is when DHS took custody of Joshua. And then December 3rd, they took custody of Bethany. And then the other kids stayed at home until the day after I was arrested. So I'll let you figure out the logic of that. So they took the person who was the threat, they took out of the home, and then they took the 4 kids the next day. So they took Emily, David, Sarah, and Isaac and separated them into 3 different foster homes on April 2nd, 2014. And then Charlie was told by DHS that if he would divorce me, they would give him the kids back right away, but he refused. So they took, so then he had to fight for DHS for 10 months to get the kids back. And he got all of them back except for Bethany, because by February of 2015, Bethany had been diagnosed with a fatal lung disease as a result of them not managing her medical care properly. And so she couldn't come home because she required 24-hour care, and Charlie was working. So he was not able to take care of Bethany's needs, and DHS didn't offer him the same support that they were offering the foster parent to take care of Bethany. So he had to agree to leave her in foster care, but he had the other 5 kids at home. So then I came home with the assurance that DHS would leave us alone. And 2 days after I came home, they reopened a case against me. And their concern was that I came home. That was what they said. They said I posed a threat to Joshua, but not to any of my other children. And they basically said, they wrote that Charlie was so brainwashed by me that he would not be able or willing to protect Joshua from me. I had been home for less than 48 hours. We had people from the Medill Justice Project, including you, documenting my return home and subsequent reunification with my family. We had traveled up and back to Portland. And so I had no alone time with my family at all. And so that pretty much proved that DHS was acting maliciously and violating the terms of the settlement agreement that we had made. But the judge did not allow DHS to remove the kids. He did allow DHS to intrude on my family's life for 8 more months. And then 2 days before we were going to have our hearing and finally be able to lay out the evidence for the judge, DHS dismissed their case against us. And that was on October 18th, 2016. And then 2 months later is when I had my cardiac arrest. So
have things sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, what? Oh, yeah. And then the cardiac arrest was kind of a wake-up call for me. It forced me to ask why I had survived, because statistically, 90% of people who experience a sudden cardiac arrest die, but I didn't. And so that kind of, spend time thinking, well, what was God's reason for that? And it was then that I first gave serious consideration to becoming an attorney. I knew that I wanted to help others who had been falsely accused. I wanted to change laws. I want to be able to prevent other people from going through what I went through, because it was all so needless, and the damage and the destruction that it caused was just so widespread. And so, I believe that God has a plan, and that He allowed my family and me to go through that hell for a purpose. And so I sought out His reason for why I was still here, and that put me on the educational path that I'm walking right now. So I will graduate in June with associate degrees for criminal justice and political science. And then in the fall, I will be transferring to a four-year university where I will complete bachelor's degrees in criminal justice and political science with minors in psychology and ethics. And then it is my intention to attend law school.
Wow, what a story. Purpose in the pain, huh?
Yeah, God brings beauty from ashes, right?
Well, exactly. Well, Kate, this is it's been a moving story to hear what you've been through, and I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I'm reminded that how easy it is that any of us finds ourselves in a tough situation, or can find ourselves in a really difficult situation. So I appreciate you sharing your story and what you've been through, and how you've been able to piece your life back together with your family. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alec.
This podcast is sponsored by Republic Book Publishers, which brings you books tackling the important issues of the day and the upcoming book Aftermath, When It Felt Like Life Was Over by Alec Klein. For more information, please check out republicbookpublishers.com. Thank you for joining us today. Please stay tuned for our next podcast involving stories from prisoners, their families, and those helping them find justice and redemption. And please subscribe to the Life on the Other Side podcast on iTunes.